Hello again, and welcome back to Channel 514 and SPK Plus, where we will be continuing our discussion of Egyptian literature in our series Exploring Ancient Literature. And last episode, we discussed the pyramid texts after introducing Egyptian civilization and its literature in general, and some of the ideas we want to focus on and some of the misconceptions we want to clear up in our presentations. So this time, having discovered another example of some of the more interesting pyramid texts in a different volume, I'm going to read one of these utterances from the pyramid texts, which is specially selected in this volume, which, once again, is the Literature of Ancient Egypt from Yale University Press, edited by William Kelly Simpson. And in this volume, the texts were specially selected for the level of interest, scholarly interest that they present, well, in any case, they're specially selected for being good examples from the texts, and because I was selecting at random in our last video, I thought this time we would use one of these, which has been chosen by a specialist and someone more knowledgeable than myself. And also, we will, after that, finish discussing these mortuary texts that are associated with the mortuary cult that is such an outstanding and famous and illustrious feature of ancient Egyptian life. Now, if you read a book on ancient Egypt or you go to a museum and see an exhibit, you'll see lots of examples of things connected with this funerary cult. And so we tend to emphasize this aspect of Egyptian culture more than others, or it tends to loom larger in our imagination. So Egypt for us tends to be all about pyramids and mummies, dead people and their stuff, dead people and the things that are buried with them, their tombs and their grave goods. And so after this episode, in which we will finish with the whole mortuary cult thing, we can move on to other types of literature and get a greater sense of the breadth and depth of Egyptian literature and life in ancient Egypt, and the concerns and preoccupations on the minds of these people in the ancient past. But first, we have to give the pyramids and mummies their due, right? So let's go right ahead and read this utterance from the pyramid texts. And if you remember last time, in the translation from 1952 that I used by the scholar from Trinity College at the University of Toronto, when he came to the king's name, he just put in the letter N, when actually in the primary texts, they use the name of the particular king, and in this translation, they go ahead and use the different names of the different kings, because obviously these texts are from 9 different pyramids, so different names of different kings are going to be used. So utterance 217 is the one we're going to be reading, and the king in this one, let me see if I can find where his name is used. His name is Unis. So there's no footnote here explaining about him, but in any case, we're going to go ahead and read this text. And the subtitle that the translator gives to it, Utterance 217, once again, and there are hundreds and hundreds of utterances. I believe there are over 500 of them, well over 500. He subtitles it, The Deceased Ascends to Re Atum. So Re Atum would be a composite figure made from 2 gods, Re and Atum. So these are actually separate gods in their origins, and they were worshipped in separate cults and different cult centers. But by the time this text has been written, under the United Egyptian monarchy, they have have been combined into one god and are being worshipped as one god with this hyphenated name, Re Atum. So that's enough explanation about that, but both have connections with the sun. Both are, in a sense, solar gods. And so, of course, like I said last time, the whole point of the pyramid text, so the idea that stands out more than anything else, is that the king is going up to the stars, and he's going to live there among the gods, among the imperishable stars. So there's a special afterlife and a special kind of immortality and apotheosis and life among the gods that's reserved for the king alone. So here we are, Utterance 2:17, the deceased ascends to Re Atum. O Re Atum, this Unis has come to you as an Ach who knows not destruction, as Lord of the destiny of the ends of the earth. Your son has come to you, this Unis has come to you. You will travel the firmament, united in the darkness, and you will rise on the horizon, in the place where you are radiant. O Seth and Nephthys, go and declare to the gods of Upper Egypt and their Achu, behold, this Unis comes indeed as a spirit who knows not destruction. Should he will that you die, then die you shall. Should he will that you live, then live you shall. O Re Atum, this Unis has come to you as an Ach who knows not destruction. As Lord of the destiny of the ends of the earth, your son has come to you. This Unis has come to you. You will travel the firmament, united in the darkness, and you will rise on the horizon, in the place where you are radiant. O Osiris and Isis, go and declare to the gods of Lower Egypt and their Achu, behold, this Unis has come indeed as a spirit who knows not destruction. Praiseworthy is he, Lord of the Nile flood. Praise him, O spirits who are in the waters. Whomever he wills to live, he indeed shall live. Whomever he wills to die, he indeed shall die. O Re Atum, this Unis has come to you as an Ach who knows not destruction, as Lord of the destiny of the ends of the earth. Your son has come to you, this Unis has come to you. You will travel the firmament, united in the darkness, and you will rise on the horizon in the place where you are radiant. O Thoth, go and declare to the western gods and their Achu, behold, this Unis has come as an Ach who knows not destruction, one adorned as Anubis around his neck, ruler of the western height. He will try the hearts, for he is powerful over the hearts. Whomever he wills to live, he indeed shall live. Whomever he wills to die, he indeed shall die. O Re Atum, this Unis has come to you as an Ach who knows not destruction, as Lord of the destiny of the ends of the earth. Your son has come to you, this Unis has come to you. You will travel the firmament united in the darkness, and you will rise on the horizon in the place where you are radiant. O Horus, go and declare to the eastern bow and their Achu, behold, this Unis has come as an Ach who knows not destruction. Whomever he wills to live, he indeed shall live. Whomever he wills to die, he indeed shall die. O Re Atum, your son has come to you, Unis has come to you. Cause him to ascend to you, and clasp him to yourself in your embrace, for he is your son, the son of your body unto eternity. End quote. So that will be our last reading from the pyramid texts. And the text that we're going to move on into is a rather broad and large literature called the Coffin Texts. So the pyramid texts were written on pyramids, and they were for the king. The Coffin Texts were written in coffins, and they were for the people. Not just anyone, but people who could afford this kind of burial arrangement. So before I read the selections that I've made from here, I'm going to read the short introduction that our editor, which one of our translators actually, an Edward F. Wendt Jr., his initials are here, EFW. So this is what he has to say about this. Following the collapse of the Old Kingdom, and remember that's in the 22nd century BC, following the collapse of the Old Kingdom, royal pyramid texts were gradually appropriated by commoners and new spells were also composed for general use. There are over 1,000 spells that make up the corpus of funerary texts known as the Coffin Texts, inscribed primarily on coffins of the Middle Kingdom. The 2 spells translated here have been selected because of their literary interest. Spell 148, which we'll be reading, pertaining to the myth of Horus's birth, is of dramatic nature and may actually have been performed in a religious ritual. Spell 162, which we won't bother reading, is poetic in its treatment of the 4 winds and seems to have been adapted from the secular realm for funerary usage. So here's spell 148, and there are some key Egyptian gods involved, notably Horus and his mother Isis, his father Osiris, and his wicked uncle Set is alluded to, but I don't think he's actually... No, he is mentioned by name, okay. So I won't bother explaining too much about these figures in Egyptian mythology in this video, but in a future video, when we start talking about stories about the gods, there will be occasion to discuss them more, in some more detail, not in great detail, but enough for our purposes. And in the case of Horus, there are actually some major popular misconceptions about him that have been brought into popular culture, imported into popular culture, through various fringe scholars, if you want to call them that, fringe figures, and through the popular film zeitgeist that was out, that was a popular topic of conversation not very long ago, and still kind of is. So I won't get at all into all of that controversy right now, but later when we get into stories about the gods, then I'll take a minute or two, hopefully just a minute or two, to talk about and address the popular misconceptions and contrast the misconceptions themselves with the actual content of the writings that have come down to us from the ancients and the commentaries on this this complicated mythology that have been left for us by Greek authors like Plutarch, especially Plutarch's letter to Clea. So if that's at all familiar to you, or if that's something you care to look up before we get around to the point of talking about it, then by all means go ahead and do so. But that will really be one key text that we use, and which will give us occasion to dispel all of this popular modern jugglery. I used that word last time. I kind of like that word, jugglery, like you're juggling something to confuse people. So all of this popular jugglery about Horus and Isis, etc., etc. But anyway, spell 148 from the Coffin Texts, it involves these gods, these mythological Egyptian gods. So it starts with the words, to make a transformation into a falcon. So I'm assuming that the people didn't actually think their dead body was going to turn into a falcon. I mean, there's no evidence that they thought that, but probably this has some kind of spiritual significance in that the deceased is being compared to or identified with this god and triumphing over death and entering into a happy state in the next world. So, spell 148, without further ado, to make a transformation into a falcon, from the Coffin Texts. A thunderbolt claps. The gods become afraid. Isis awakes pregnant with the seed of her brother Osiris. The woman gets up in a hurry, her heart joyful over the seed of her brother Osiris. She says, "O you gods, I am Isis, Osiris's sister, who wept for the father of the gods, Osiris, who settled the massacring of the 2 lands. His seed is within my womb. It is as son of the foremost of the Aenead, who will rule this land, become heir to Geb, speak on his father's behalf, and slay Seth, the adversary of his father Osiris, that a god's form has congealed in the egg. Come, you gods, and make his protection within my womb. Know in your hearts that he is your Lord, this God who is in his egg, blue in aspect, the Lord of the gods. Large and beautiful are they, the barbs of the double plumes of lapis lazuli. Oh, says Re Atum, may your heart be wise, O woman. Atum to the gods, but how do you know that it is a god, the lord and heir of the Aenead, that you should act against him inside the egg? I am Isis, more potent and august than the gods. A god is within my womb who is the seed of Osiris. Then Re Atum said, If you are pregnant, young woman, it means that you should conceal from the gods whom you are pregnant with and giving birth to, that he is the seed of Osiris, lest that enemy who slew his father should come and break the egg in its nonage, the one against whom the great of magic shall make protection. Hear this, O gods, says Isis, which Re Atum, lord of the mansion of sacred images, has said. It is within my body that he has decreed for me my son's protection, and it is within this womb of mine that he has disposed an entourage around him, for he knows that he is Osiris's heir. So protection of the falcon that is in this my body has been set by Re Atum, lord of the gods. Isis to Horus, Pray, come forth on earth, and I will give you praise, and the retainers of your father Osiris shall serve you. I will make your name once you have reached the horizon, having passed over the battlements of the mansion of him whose name is hidden. Isis describes her situation. Strength is leaving from within my flesh, now that the critical moment has arrived within my flesh, and the moment for him to become vigorous has arrived. As soon as the Radiant One journeys, he will have taken his own place, seated at the head of the gods in the entourage of the unfurler. Isis to Horus, Give the falcon cry, my son Horus. Settle down in this land of your father Osiris, in this your name of falcon who is upon the battlements of the mansion of him whose name is hidden. I am asking that you be among the followers of Re of the horizon, at the prow of the primeval bark, forever and ever. Isis goes down to the unfurler who has brought Horus, for Isis had asked that he should be the unfurler as leader of eternal recurrence. Isis to the gods, Look at Horus, you gods. I am Horus, the great falcon who is upon the battlements of the mansion of him whose name is hidden. My flight has reached the horizon, for I have overpassed the gods of the sky, making my position more prominent than that of the primordial gods. Even the contender bird cannot equal my initial flight. My place is far away from Seth, the adversary of my father Osiris, for I have used the roads of the eternal recurrence of dawnlight, and by my flight I have become elevated. There is no god who has achieved what I have achieved. I shall be savage against the adversary of my father Osiris, placed beneath my sandals, in this my name of Ademu. I am Horus whom Isis bore, and whose protection was made inside the egg. The fiery blast of your mouths shall not assail me, and what you might say against me cannot reach me. I am Horus, more distant of place than humans and gods. I am Horus, son of Isis. So again, that's spell 148 from the Coffin Texts, and because it has to do with this myth of Horus being born after his father's murder, and then triumphing over his father's killer and gaining power over the land, I'm assuming it has something to do with the deceased himself triumphing over death and entering into his kingdom, entering into some kind of happy blessedness, and gaining, probably also being recognized and welcomed by the gods. So that's the Coffin Texts. And now there's one more text, one major literary, you could almost call it a genre really, in this overall category of mortuary texts that have to do with this mortuary cult that we so much associate with Egypt. And that is the Book of the Dead. Now, I'm not going to read from this one, the Budge translation, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, so this is an old translation. It's still very popular, and it's fun, and it's interesting, but it's considered to be inaccurate or dated, because after all, Budge bought the text that he used to make this book and make this translation in 1888. So the science and the study of Egyptology was only just spreading its wings at that time, so this is an early work in the history of Egyptology. And so there are some key passages that are in this book that we were just reading from, and so we're going to be using those. But in any case, what we call the Book of the Dead, the Egyptians themselves tended to call something like the Book of Going Forth by Day, or the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Sometimes the chapters of Going Forth or Coming Forth by Day. And what it really was is a papyrus, a roll of papyrus that would be buried with the person and would contain prayers and incantations and instructions that were supposed to help them get safely to the beautiful West, the underworld, and to take their place there. And they also had to go through a kind of particular judgment in which their heart was weighed on a set of scales against a feather that represented all things good and true and just, really, which the Egyptians called ma'at, which is a concept, a religious and philosophical concept in Egyptian thought. So one example of the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Going Forth by Day that we have today, one of these papyri, and I've seen it once at the Field Museum in Chicago, and that would have been either in '03 at an exhibit called Eternal Egypt, which had all the great treasures of the British Museum on tour, or I believe this was in '03. There was another exhibit that was in '06 that was the treasures of King Tut's tomb and other New Kingdom type artifacts. All very spectacular, but this one I believe was the one from the exhibit in '03 that I saw. So it's one of the great treasures of the British Museum. And again, E.A. Wallace Budge bought it in 1888 for the museum. And it's also known as the Papyrus of Ani because it was found with Ani, who was a scribe from the city of Thebes in Upper Egypt. Now, there's something else that I wanted to mention in connection with that. Oh yes, in the editions of the Book of Mormon that are handed out or distributed by the LDS Church, they include a book or a text they call the Book of Abraham, which is actually based on, well, not really based on anything, because Joseph Smith Jr. made up what he called the Book of Abraham. And he claimed to be translating from a scroll that was actually just another Book of the Dead scroll, of which there are a great many. And they all tend to be the same thing, really. How do you get to the underworld, and what to do to get into there, and to have a nice life there. So it has nothing to do with Abraham or the patriarchs or anything like that, but because hieroglyphic writing at the time, I believe this would have been very shortly after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, so it would have to have been. So an antiquities dealer, not really even an antiquities dealer, but a traveling huckster, sold this scroll, and I believe a mummy and some other artifacts that he had somehow obtained and wanted to unload, to some of the followers of Joseph Smith Jr., the founder of Mormonism, who then claimed that they were the Book of Abraham and that he knew how to translate them, and that they were written in Reformed Egyptian, which is a language, a made-up name of a language, so there is no Reformed Egyptian. But in any case, if someone gives you a Book of Mormon, you'll find this thing called the Book of Abraham in there, and a picture of one of the illustrations in the scroll that is owned by the LDS Church. I believe it's owned by the LDS Church. It may be owned by another Mormon sect, but in fact it's just another Book of the Dead scroll, and that's what I wanted to mention about that. So that's another example, really, of how all kinds of of how there's a mystique and an air of mystery about Egypt and its artifacts, and it all seems so strange and mysterious and magical. And so if you don't know too much about it and aren't acquainted with some of the basic facts about it, then anyone can tell you anything, and you just have to take them at their word. In today's world, you don't really have to do that, because you can find out what you want to know very easily. But of course, at that time, in the first or second quarter of the 19th century, you could not. So, anyway, I've introduced the Book of the Dead, what we call the Book of the Dead. And this will conclude our little exploration of the texts from Egypt connected with the mortuary cult. And so, without further ado, let's get right into that. Now, this part that I wanted to read is from, I'm not sure if this is from the Papyrus of Ani or another one. Probably it is the Papyrus of Ani, but the Book of the Dead 125, so spell 125 or chapter 125, is what we're going to be reading from. And what that consists of, and I mentioned this in the second study in our 10-part series, Death, Judgment, and Life, is the negative confession. So the idea is that when you get to the Hall of Judgment in the underworld, and you're going to be judged for what you've done and how you've lived, and your heart, whether it's weighed down by bad things or whether it balances out just perfectly on the scales with the feather of truth and goodness and justice and all of that, when you come to that Hall of Judgment, you're going to recite this negative confession. So you're going to say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, so all these things won't be held against you. So I'll just read that part of that part, really. It's long enough that, and we can get what we want to know out of, or we can get a good sense of it from only a part of it. So I'll begin and then go a little ways into it. So recitation by NN, that's the deceased, so just a variable for the deceased, NN. Hail to you, great God, Lord of the two truths. I have come before you, my Lord, just so that you might bring me, so that I might see your beauty. I know you, and I know your name and the names of the 42 gods who are with you in this hall of the two truths, who live on those who preserve evil, who swallow their blood on that day of the reckoning of characters in the presence of Wen Nefer. Behold, the two daughters, his two eyes. Lord of truth is your name. Behold, I have come before you, bringing to you truth, having repelled for you falsehood. I have not committed wrongdoing against anyone. I have not mistreated cattle. I have not done injustice in the place of truth. I do not know that which should not be. I have not done evil. I have not daily made labors in excess of what should be done for me. My name has not reached the bark of the governor. I have not debased a god. I have not deprived an orphan. I have not done that which the gods abominate. I have not slandered a servant to his superior. I have not caused pain. I have not caused weeping. I have not killed. I have not commanded to kill. I have not made suffering for anyone. I have not diminished the offering loaves in the temples. I have not damaged the offering cakes of the gods. I have not stolen the cakes of the blessed dead. I have not copulated. I have not been lascivious. I have not added to, nor have I subtracted from the offering measure. I have not subtracted from the arura measure. I have not encroached upon fields. I have not added to the weight of the balance. I have not tampered with the plummet of the scales. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. I have not deprived the flocks of their pasturage. I have not snared birds of the branches of the gods. I have not trapped fish in their marshes. I have not diverted water in its season. I have not erected a dam against flowing water. I have not extinguished a fire at its critical moment. I have not neglected the days concerning their meat offerings. I have not driven away the cattle of the god's property. I have not stopped a god in his procession. I am pure. I am pure. I am pure. I am pure. My purity is the purity of that great phoenix that is in Heracleopolis, because I am indeed that nose of the Lord of Breath, who vivifies all the subjects on that day of filling the eye of Horus in Heliopolis in the 2nd month of winter, last day, in the presence of the Lord of this land. I am one who has seen the filling of the eye of Horus in Heliopolis. Evil shall not happen against me in this land or in this hall of the two truths, because I know the names of the gods who are in it, the followers of the great god. So what he does then, because there are all these supernatural beings in the hall of judgment, and they're all very fearsome and scary, and so you have to placate them all. So what he does is he says things like, "Oh, smasher of bones who has come forth from Heracleopolis, I have not told lies." Or, "Oh, he whose eyes are flint, who has come forth from Latopolis, I have not committed crookedness." So, "Oh, this person or this creature, I haven't done this. Oh, that person or that creature, I haven't done that." Now, see if there's anything else really in this chapter that would be interesting to go over. Well, how about just the very last chapters, or the very last paragraph, as it's put in this translation. So, having said all these things, said all the important words that you're supposed to say, and made the whole negative confession, here's how the chapter ends. What should be done when being present in the hall of two truths? A man should say this spell when pure and clean, dressed in clothing, shod in white sandals, painted with black eye paint, anointed with the finest myrrh oil, and having offered fresh meat, fowl, incense, bread, beer, and vegetables. Now make for yourself this image in drawing upon pure ground with Nubian ochre, overlaid with soil on which neither pig nor goats have trod. As for the one for whom this book is done, he will flourish and his children will flourish. He will be a confidant of the king and his entourage. There shall be given to him a cake, a jug of beer, a loaf, and a large portion of meat from upon the altar of the great god. He cannot be turned back from any portal of the west. He will be ushered in with the kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. He will be a follower of Osiris. Truly effective, millions of times. So, that would be the Book of the Dead. So, notice there's no Abraham in there. Now, that would be our few presentations, 2 presentations on the mortuary cult and the literature associated with it. So after this we'll move into stories about the gods, so mythological texts, and after that we'll get into more straightforwardly literary texts, which mainly come from the Middle Kingdom. So, and that of course is the first half or so of the 2nd millennium BC. But we're not there yet. So, thanks for joining us for this, and we'll be back in action pretty soon. I don't have a very specific plan. Obviously, I'm not planning or preparing these much at all, just very roughly for 1 or 2 minutes before I begin. But thanks again for joining us, for your patience, and please don't forget to join us again. And we'll be seeing you soon, so have a great rest of the week, and I hope your week is off to a great start. And have a nice day. Tomorrow, of course, because it's night, but thanks again, and we'll see you soon.